You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. Thanks for joining us again for our revisit of Between Black and Blue, Complexity within the Black Law Enforcement Community. In Part 2, our panelists shift their focus to Black representation in law enforcement and how cultural competency training can improve the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. As stated in Part 1, this panel discussion examines the potential double backlash that Black police officers face in the profession and suggests specific pathways officers can follow to help change the culture inside agencies to result in a more positive perception of the law enforcement community by the public. As a reminder, this program was moderated by Dr. Lorenzo Boyd, Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of New Haven. And he was joined by Sheriff Marion Brown of the Dallas County, Texas Sheriff's Department, Chief Ernest Finley of the Montgomery, Alabama Police Department, Chief Jeffrey Glover of the Tempe, Arizona Police Department, Sheriff Melody Maddox of the DeKalb County, Georgia Sheriff's Office, and Shamari Williams, Managing Partner at Verizon. This is the second part of a three-part series. Tune into the third and final part of this series on February 22nd. And now for Part 2 of Between Black and Blue, Complexity within the Black Law Enforcement Community.
So the next question, I'm going to start off with Chief Glover. A lot of people talk about representation. A lot of people say that if we had more Black officers in Black communities, the problems would go away. So that's the backdrop of the question. In your opinion, do you think communities of color actually want more Black officers? Do they see that increased representation as the solution for crime fighting and better support of neighborhoods? And ultimately, should that be the goal of law enforcement?
Well, yes. I mean, to simply put the question, yes, I do believe that we have to have more representation in that. I believe that within my community, within the Tempe community, I mean, we're a very diverse community. We have 195,000 people. We have one of the largest campus atmospheres with Arizona State University in the nation, right in the center of the city. So we have a very diverse city. And I think that we, in terms of the way that we approach this is from the hiring and recruitment standpoint is that, we're trying to come to that place where we can mirror, what our community's members, our community members look like. And so we really are trying to be intentional in that. I think that there's a certain comfort level in terms of having more officers of color within the organization and, because of the community that we're supporting. And I believe that the community wants and has that expectation that we are going to bring in more officers of color into our agency. Now, this doesn't always translate into the feeling of safety and security for all of our community members in that aspect, that it also depends on what the culture is of your agency and how that's being led and what's being driven. And so, we're trying to create an environment that is very inclusive in Tempe and ensuring that everybody is respected and that procedural justice is at the forefront of everything that we do. I do feel that, our goal, our goal in law enforcement should be that, this basic principles of just, creating those strong relationships and community building should be always at the forefront of anything that we're doing. And because we don't want to be the come in and be an occupying force, we want to be able to represent the community that we serve and be good public servants.
We don't ever want to just use the term Black community as a monolithic group, implying that all 45 million Black people in this country have the same identity. But with that in mind, Sheriff Brown, what do you think? Do you think communities of color want more Black officers?
Well, and as I was saying earlier, I think that they do. I think it's important for us to build trust first and foremost. if we don't have trust, then it's very difficult for us to police our communities. And so if we have people who, as the chief has already said, if we come from the community, if we have investment in that community, then we're more apt to trust one another. And not only are we more apt to trust one another, but we can actually go into the communities and we can visit with those communities and not feel like those communities are thinking that we're unable to do what we need to do to police their communities. So I think it's important. I think it should be intentional that we are hiring people of color. I think that we should be intentional in our recruiting efforts. And I think that we should be inclusive in law enforcement. We need to make sure that the people that we are policing, that they are reflective, we are reflective of what that community looks like. I think it's extremely important.
Sheriff Maddox, we acknowledge that these cities aren't all the same. Montgomery is not like DeKalb, which is not like Dallas. So what do you think? Do people of color want more Black cops?
Well, let me say this, and I've heard that before from being out in the community, of course, safely, considering that it's COVID still. But I've heard that several times. They want people to respond to calls that look like them. Unfortunately, in an ideal world, that would be also great, I guess. But unfortunately, you know, for law enforcement, who wants to do our job? Nobody wants to do our job. So right now we're all of us from all over the world are basically pulling from the same pool. But for me, let me just say this: in DeKalb County, we have about approximately 750,000 plus citizens. 2/3 of that are Black. Now, where am I going to get the officers to fill all of 2/3 of that? But it goes back to, as all the panelists have said, let's get out in the community. It's about trust. It's about training. You have to train these individuals how to think, how to act, how to respond. That's where that cultural diversity comes in. The crisis intervention training comes in. And it also looks at the leader. Again, when they see us out there being involved in the community, it goes back to the level of trust. And when we're talking about recruiting, going back to what I'm doing now, I've dropped my age. Instead of being 20 to come in as a detention officer, I have now dropped the age down to 20. So we are looking at finding a solution to the problem. The solution is to go out there and bring them and show them what we do so that they can understand, groom them, train them, make them a part, give them a career. We do mentor. As soon as you walk in the door, to come in to work here, you are assigned a mentor. So we're putting you on a career track. Here's the thing with the sheriff's office. So when you leave from here, should you decide that you want to go out and become a police officer with the police department from any municipality here in the state of Georgia, now they have gained an outstanding officer, because that officer has been taught how to talk to people, how to treat people, because it's so diverse. This jail has no discrimination on it whatsoever, and crime does not as well.
So just to be clear, you dropped your detention age from 21 to 20?
No, 18 years old.
From 20 to 18.
To combat that pipeline to prison. So even if you have 30 to 60 days prior to your birthday, if you're 17 and you're in high school, you can go ahead and apply for the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. Upon your completion, once you graduate with your high school diploma or GED, you automatically walking into the door, making $37,000 a year. What we're doing, we're taking them off the streets, because if you don't get them in between that time, remember, they can't carry a gun until they're 21. So if you get that time, if you don't get them from that 17 from high school in between that time, that's where the problem is going to be, because what else are they going to do? And then we have to look at those individual records. You know, at what time are we going to say it's okay, that was a mistake that took place 15, 20 years ago?
Chief Finley, you've been in most of your career in Atlanta, and now you're in Montgomery, two very different communities. So what do you think? Is that what communities of color want? And should that be the goal of law enforcement moving forward?
No, and I don't think so. And I think that Sheriff Maddox was spot on. That would piss me off. You know, so I think that if I go to a call and it's a white resident and they want a white officer, that will piss me off. So my thing is, it's a training issue, right? So we train our officers the same correct way. So Black, white, Hispanic, doesn't matter, it's that training. So as long as we do the guidelines by our post standards and train officers professionally, I think that we're fine. I think that it's all about that engagement. It's all about building that trust and handling that call as professional as possible. So I stay away from categories like that. I think it's important that we as supervisors and as leaders monitor the way that we handle calls and the way we treat citizens to make sure that every citizen is treated with the utmost respect and that we have that follow-up with customer service.
Dr. Boyd, if I could just add something, because I think there's so many points that are being made. Technology is a major bridge to really driving meaningful relationships with the community. Many of our youth are used to, by the time they're like 8 or 9, they know how to use these things pretty well, right? So what's the way to connect? The way we connect is through technology in some ways, right? And there, of course, there's also just the plain old kinetic entry point to really driving a meaningful relationships and trust, building that trust, particularly with our youth. And I think that is essential in the recruitment efforts. But we also understand that we need to help be part of what do kids have to do? What are they learning? How are we contributing to their education, right? To build those pipelines and paths, to create paths for them for careers within Verizon, very lucrative careers within Verizon. So very similar to what's been described, we have a major presence around HBCUs and how we recruit, but also when we think about how we drive safety for our officers, destination zero. Officers need to know that there's technology out there that will help them, provide them with situational awareness, so that obviously they're it could be in a very dangerous situation, and that technology really helps to not only to drive safety, but also provide those meaningful bridges to the community.
Absolutely. The technology is a major emphasis as we move forward, and technology is actually what's changing policing moving forward. So thank you for that.
Dr. Boyd.
Yes, please.
Excuse me, it's Sheriff Brown. I want to say something in response to your last question. I don't want to leave the impression that I think that the African-American community only wants African-American officers to respond to their needs for police service. That is not what the question was. The question was, do I think that African-American people want to see more representation? And yes, I do think that we want and we need and we absolutely should have more representation, but that's not to articulate that only African-American officers should be responding to African-American calls for service. I wanted to clarify that because I think there was a little disconnect somewhere in there, and I didn't want to leave that impression. So thank you.
Excellent. That's a good point. And we absolutely were saying we're looking for representation, not that Black officers are better than white officers. That's not where we were going at all. We were just asking about representation. So thank you for that clarity. So as much as we're talking about Black law enforcement, we're also talking about communities of color. And a lot of times when we talk about the BIPOC community, there has historically been a disconnect between policing and communities of color, particularly with major incidents like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean. I can go on for an hour. And after each of these incidents, there's some sort of post-incident action that happens. The one thing we can say is right after the George Floyd murder, there was a lot of work with the community and the police, a lot of officers deciding we need to do things differently. So here's my question for you, Chief Finley. Which after incident action do you think is the most effective way to bridge the gap between the police and communities of color? And do you think that the community responds well to these after incident actions?
And that's a good question. And I would say, and I think the way you started off, Dr. Boyd, is with the Tamir Rice, Gardner, Baton Rouge situation. And we can go on with these different incidents that happened within the last 10 or 15 years. It seems like we're kicking the can down the road, right? And so after these major incidents, we get together, we have these conversations, and it looks like things are going the right way. Then we go to court, what happens? And so again, when I think about the George Floyd in Minneapolis, I felt the same way, right? But I think what happened this time, people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think that this, with the revision and with the movement, with all these protests, it makes you think you got to change. And so part of that change, and the reality is that the majority of these law enforcement agencies throughout this country still have those policies in place about the choking, about the restraint. They still have it. And so I think a conscientious department and jurisdiction will make some of those strategic changes when you have to reform those policies, as to deal with restraints, to deal with the choking, and make that happen. So that's the reality of Black law enforcement executive, to make those changes. Breonna tell the same thing, And so when we look at those rogue cops, and we're gonna call it like it is, those 3 officers on a no-knock warrant, that's rogueness. That's crazy. So the policy and procedure, if you stick by that, in the constitutional search and seizure, you should do fine. And so again, there's still agencies to this day is afraid to raise their hand and say that I'm gonna do away with no knock. And that's what you gotta do, because what's more important, a body or property? A body is. And so you put yourself in that situation that you're gonna kill somebody. And especially if it's not approved up the chain of command. And again, we got to constantly revise these policies and that temperature check. And so those major incidents or those temperature checks, and make sure that your policy and your department is on line with the best practices that you can possibly do.
Excellent. Thank you. Sheriff Maddox, just before you leave, can I get you to chime in on that? I know you have to go. After incident actions, which ones do you think work well?
Well, first of all, let me just say this. There shouldn't have been any after incident actions, because there shouldn't have happened from the beginning, from the first place. We should have already had actions in place. It's about, again, going back, training your officers how to treat people, how to talk to people, how to respond to people, regardless of their color. It's about being fair. It's about not being afraid. It's about doing your job and doing it with the expectancy of excellence, accountability, and respect, as we have done here at the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. However, the after plan, as some people say, go out and be involved in the community. I've been doing that. And that's not to toot my own horn or anything, because I saw this, because I had the opportunity to talk to those individuals in the community. Sometimes you have to listen to what people are saying and bring it back. That's why a lot of times we can't just sit here in this seat and give that glamorous life. We actually, as the leaders, have to go out and mix and mingle. We have to dance. We have to stroll, whatever it takes in order to hear what they're saying and bring it back. So an after plan is what it is. Did I have to come in and change my policy? Yes, I did, because again, I had been here a year. By the time I got sworn in, pandemic hit, I had to go into action on making sure that my inmates were safe. And number one, that my employees were safe, because if the employees are safe, I know they're going to make sure that the inmates are taken care of. So the after action plan, before action plan, I believe in just planning. I'm very proactive, and rather being reactive, I don't believe in that. I'm already planning as we speak. As I sit here, that's why I'm getting ready to get off of this one to go on another one, because I'm planning for tomorrow, the what if. I tell my whole team, don't just sit there and say, well, we don't know. No, what if? It's not that if, because it is. So let's go ahead and be prepared. Same way with the COVID, the pandemic. It wasn't if we're going to get an inmate with COVID. It was a matter of when we're going to get the inmate with COVID. And when we got the one, we knew there was going to be 2, 3, and 4, and we had to jump on it. So,
thank you very much, Sheriff Melody Maddox.
Thank you so much. And I have to jump off and get on my other one. They're already bugging me.
Thank you for joining us. Chief Glover, you were in the middle of this. You were retired. You were a civilian and came back into policing to run a major department after this. What are your thoughts on the after incident actions and whether or not they're effective in bridging the gap between the police and communities of color?
Yes, I jumped in face first, right back into the fire in the midst of all of this. And, the George Floyd incident just sickened me to see that, and anytime you have an incident like that happens in one part of the United States, we're all affected. It doesn't matter if it's in New York, it's going to affect Arizona, it's going to affect, Minnesota, Florida. It doesn't matter. So, in these things, it sort of led me to actually come back into law enforcement and help with our community, the community that I grew up in terms of, my adult life working within the Tempe Police Department. And so, really, one of the things that I always stressed, even, coming up in the department is that, we are customer service agents. This is our job is customer service. Being a public servant means that, you don't get to just be badge heavy and just do whatever it is that you want to do. We have rules in place, and this job is about being able to serve your community, and that is first and foremost what you're supposed to do. And in terms of what Chief Finley had mentioned in regards to policy, one of the first things that we started looking at, and it was going back and revising policies. There was things that we were already doing in terms of de-escalation and revamping our training as it related to de-escalation. We partnered with Arizona State University to create a program that is tailor-made specifically for our department and for our community. We also joined the 8 Can't Wait program. We went through and we banned the use of chokeholds. We made some of the different policy changes that they had recommended that we implement, and they were pleased that in a lot of cases of the policies, of the 8 policies, key policies that they looked at for us, was that we had already been following that model for most of our policies. I believe it was 6 of them. We just needed to clarify a few things to get to the 8. And we're proud to be a part of that campaign, because the times are changing, and we have to catch up to what's going on socially, what's going on in the United States and within our communities. And sometimes law enforcement, we're 2 steps behind. So we're just trying to catch up.
Excellent. Sheriff Brown, your thoughts after incident actions. Do they work? Are they effective?
Well, Doctor, I think that they can work. Our agency, just like everybody else, we began to look at our policies and review those policies and see what we needed to do to update those policies or create policies. I'm proud to say that basically what we needed to do was to just kind of tweak some of the policies that we already had in place. And while we might not have been calling them, for instance, the duty to intervene, we might not have been calling it that. We had a policy already that said it is your responsibility to intervene. And so we reviewed our policies, but it's not something that you just do and it's done. It's something that you have to do regularly. You have to continue to do it. You have to look at the environment around you. You have to renew your training policies and renew your training. You have to update your training, and you have to get out in the community. As Sheriff Maddox said, you have to get out there and you have to have those non-enforcement interactions in the community. Those are extremely important. That is the way that people get to know you and you get to know the people. And so they can be effective, those after action things that we do, but it's not like we do it and then we're just through with it. It has to be redone every day, all over, constant reviewing of it, constant renewing of it. And it's just like Chief Glover said, this is customer service business is what we're in. We've gotten it a little confused. And somewhere along the way, we decided that perhaps because we think the people have no choice of who's going to police them or they have to call us as the police. It's not true. We still have to be engaged in customer service. This is what we do. This is what should be expected of the community when they call for police. We work for them. You know, you work the streets and you hate to hear that person say, well, I pay your salary. Well, most certainly you do pay my salary, but besides you paying my salary, I should remember that you are a customer and I am a customer service representative. So I think that they can work. I think they have to be demonstrated by the head. And again, it's not just a one and done. It's something that becomes a philosophy. It's not just some cliche phrase that you come up with. It has to be a philosophy, and one that is demonstrated regularly so that people know that you can be trusted. You know, I have a special circumstance. I, like Sheriff Maddox, have inmates who rely on me. I want my inmates to rely on me. I want them to be able to trust me too, so that if there is something going on that maybe we don't know about, I want somebody to tell me about it. And so I have to walk amongst them and talk with them. I want them to know that we are here for customer service. This is what we do. This is what we're about.
Customer service, that's an excellent transition to where I wanted to go next, because a lot of times when we talk about community policing, the onus is on the police. We should be talking about community engagement is where we should be going. But when we talk about a customer service, Mr. Williams, let me push this back to you a little bit, because the onus is not just the police. What can private sector businesses like Verizon or our sponsors Target, what can they do to create opportunities to bring law enforcement and communities of color together to move the agenda forward?
That's a very, very good question. I think we need to support efforts to meet the community where they are, right? So I would invite, especially as we go into the Q&A session, there are a lot of you out there. If you wouldn't mind, share what would you like to see from a public-private partnership? We don't always like to profess that we know or have the answers, much in the way that has been described here about serving the community. We also recognize the ability and the awesome responsibility of the community in the way we can, right? So we need to be good ears and stewards of ways that we can help promote trust building, relationship building. I mean, that's what we do. That's what we do on a day in, day out basis. And I think that is really the crux of how we can really execute. So understanding what are those ideas, what are those things that you'd like to see more of from the community. Verizon is there. We've got the ear. We've got we have a lot of former law enforcement folks within our organization. We just recently had the Honorable Mike Mason retired from Verizon. Many of you may know who Mike Mason is. He was formerly the head of operations, assistant director of operations for the FBI for many, many years. He was our chief security officer for quite some time. And so I've learned a great deal from him and understanding ways that we can meet the community where they are. And he regularly really counseled us on ways that we can be better partners. So I believe there's always a higher gear that we can shift to. And I invite those ideas here today.
Excellent. Building that relationship, also the public-private sector, is really, really important. And we often look at the police as a monolithic group. We understand that the vast majority of policing in this country are white and male, but a significant number of people that they deal with are not. So Sheriff Brown, my question to you is, what's the impact of cultural competence training on preventing crime and building trust? Instead of being reactive, because we acknowledge upwards of 90% of policing is reactive, what's the impact on cultural competence in preventing crime and building trust with the community?
Okay, Doctor, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, talking about getting to learn and appreciate the little intricacies that are germane to specific groups. I think that we have to remember that people fear the unknown. And when you have a situation where one officer is not familiar with the culture of the caller for police service, then sometimes there could be a mixture of fear in there somewhere, and that could cause a mistake. It can dictate some bad decisions. And so I think it's important for us to train our officers in the beginning. And here in Dallas, Texas, what we've done is I have challenged my training staff to add what I'm calling, I told them it's going to be a heavy day. And essentially what I've asked them to do is I want them to take those same videos that we watched over and over and over that made us feel what people were feeling when we saw people with officers and their knees on their necks and officers shooting people unjustifiably. I want us to re-watch those and relive those. And I want the people who are being trained to be deputies for this department, I want them to have discussions about it. I want them to feel what it is that we felt when we first learned of it. And I want our folks to have a community member come in and talk about what it is that they are seeing on these videos. I want them to talk about these current events that have happened, and I don't want them to be forgotten. And so in an effort for them not to be forgotten, I want them to relive them through the video training over and over again so that the cadets get an understanding of why people feel the way that they feel. And if you bring in a community member who says, okay, and in this situation, here's why we felt this way, I think that it adds a whole lot to the cultural competency training to our deputies. So I think that's a huge piece right there. Again, if we have a better understanding of cultures, then we're less likely to fear them, and our decisions are less driven by fear, which means better decisions.
Thank you. Here's the last question, and we've got ample questions from the audience, but I just want to throw this question out to whoever is willing to answer it. What are some of the examples of police departments getting it right? You know, what is going on right that we can emulate, and what strategies have you done in your agency that you're most proud of that other people can learn from? Chief Finley, you want to start?
I wanted to piggyback off of Sheriff Brown, but anyway, I think that one of the things that I'm good at and been good at for about 20 years is to get out in the community and just really get down. And so one of the things that I kind of stole from Atlanta is part walk and talk. We do it on a regular, and that means that we're going to give love to a community for an hour or two, and just really love on that community, just to get information, receive information, and this fellowship it's not a one and done. It's one of those things that we got to constantly do it. But the other thing that we are working for perfection is that training competency when we're talking about developing a program to deal with the past that we did in Montgomery with the African Americans. So we have a program that we're working closely with EJI and the Southern Poverty Law Center to talk about those wrongs from a civilian point of view, that these young officers that really haven't been around diversity or Black people, white people, or the opposite, that they can hear of the past sins of their forefathers. And that really resonates with us when we talk about policing in a historic city like ours, to talk about those wrongs. So that's something that we are really pushing with our partnerships, again, with EJI and SPLC.
Chief Glover, what are we getting right?
Just to piggyback off of Chief Finley, I mean, when it comes to cultural competency, I mean, it's very hard to hate up close. I mean, when you are really getting engaged and you are making your staff, making your people, making the training uncomfortable, it is very hard to hate up close. And you expose them. You have to get them exposed, to that environment, and you have to make them uncomfortable in order to get them to actually see the bigger picture. And I commend Chief Finley on what he's doing out there, because that's something that we're looking at doing here in Tempe is to provide that historical perspective. That's a rare opportunity, and it's been a missed opportunity in law enforcement to not really engage on something that we know to be true. It was that, people and communities of color have not been treated fairly in this country. And so, why hide that fact? We have to be open. We have to talk about that. Something that we've recently done that I'm most proud of in Tempe is we recently finished up our mayor's public safety task force. which again, it was conversations that were extremely uncomfortable because we had everybody from Black Lives Matter to Lucha to all of the different activist groups that we engaged with conversation and let them just sort of, we peeled back the scabs and all the scar tissue and let it all hang out. And they really gave it to us, but we got a lot of great information out of it in terms of recommendations that we'll be able to utilize and implement within the department's strategic plan in the future. So, these are things that you have to do. Sometimes you have to, tear down some of those walls and bring people in that you normally would not speak to in order to actually move the dial forward.
Mr. Williams, what do you think the police are getting right?
Well, I believe I see a more intentional effort to really build the bridge in the community. I will say that recently during this pandemic, we had to really step up and help, the police community really police in a different way, right? I mean, they're trying to stay safe. All of you are human beings, right? We're all trying to stay safe in this pandemic, right? We need to protect our families as well. So, just being out there to assist when needed, answering the call at 8 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday, whatever it takes, just being there and standing side by side with our law enforcement, community is super important. We know that it will obviously materialize in a positive way out in the community at large. So, just being there, being responsive, and, just willing to listen and execute and make the right calls.
Sheriff Brown, you get the last word on this question before we go to the audience. What are we getting right? What can we emulate?
Well, I think that the things that we are getting right is what I just talked about, and that is for us to not forget and not allow those who are coming behind us to forget. It is our responsibility as leaders to make sure that those who come underneath us do not forget why we say what we say, why we do what we do. I have a saying that just because I say that Black Lives Matter does not mean that I don't believe that Blue Lives Matter. It's not like I have to choose between. Both lives can matter, believe it or not. And so I think that when we get out into the communities and we visit with our communities, Dallas County is a county with 2.6 million people. And we have some 32 cities within our county. And even with having 32 cities in our counties, we have unincorporated areas that our deputies have to patrol. We encourage our deputies to go out there and regardless of what folks look like, go out there to those areas because most of them are underserved communities. Find out what those needs are, reach those communities by addressing those needs. Maybe it means that you point them to a resource, or perhaps it's something special going on in that community that needs some special attention, then we address that need in that community. But I think those kinds of things, when we get out of these walls and we walk out amongst the community, I think we're getting it right there. It's a step in the right direction. And I think if we continue along that route, we will be better for the work.
Thank you for tuning in to this special revisit of Between Black and Blue, Complexity within the Black Law Enforcement Community, where we heard from our esteemed panelists on the support of law enforcement within communities of color. Join us next time as the discussion continues around the relationship between law enforcement and the community and how this relationship can be better served and supported. Tune in for the third and final part on February 22nd of this timely discussion. For more information on this program, follow the link in the episode description. As always, thanks to Christopher Mitchell, our Manager of Digital Content and Strategy, for producing today's episode. And many thanks to you for listening to this episode of Encore, a show from Precinct 444, a podcast by the National Law Enforcement Museum. We hope you learned something from this episode of Encore and will join us again for future revisits of past museum programs and conversations. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.